well, museum or factory, either prospect would have seemed surreal to the very first prisoners on the maze site. For 3 decades, captured paramilitaries carried on their fight inside the prison, sometimes even united with sworn enemies to defy the authorities. I've been looking back at the history of the men behind the wire. Throughout its history, the maze has been a battleground of the Troubles, pitching paramilitary against prison officer. Long Kesh, now deserted, is the oldest part of the prison. An old RAF base pressed into service after the introduction of internment. In 1974, battle for control of the prison began in earnest. The IRA set fire to the whole camp. Hand-to-hand fighting on the sports pitch left soldiers and IRA men badly injured. Loyalists, united against their common enemy, the army, actually looked after Republicans.
Some provosts were extremely apprehensive too, to say the least, whenever they found themselves being tended by UVF men.
It was increasingly a looking-glass world. Republicans and Loyalists even exchanged gifts.
So he gave me this wallet, and as you can see there's UVF, Forgotten Ulster wrote on it, and this was done by Lenny Murphy. I've had it here ever since.
Lenny Murphy, who was leader of the Shankill Butchers.
That's right. And I thought what was very, very significant was he put a red hand of Ulster on one side and a shamrock on each corner. So I think this wallet here is put down in history, that an ARA man can be handed a UVF wallet. And
these were men who would shoot each other dead without a second thought outside the prison.
yeah, that would be the case.
This surreal atmosphere changed sharply when prisoners were moved into the newly built H blocks. In a fight to regain their old political status, Republicans began the dirty protest.
It was portrayed by the British media as being some sort of a filthy, psychopathic tactic by people with little else to do, you know. But to us, rather than wear a prison uniform and criminalise what we've been at for the whole country's been at for hundreds of years, then this was the alternative, and that's so be it.
As the protests continued, Republican prisoners complained of brutality by staff.
And he used to come down the wing about 4 or 5 in the morning, and this was his wee rhyme. If you go down to our blocks today, you're sure of a big surprise, right? If you go down our blocks today, you'll hardly believe your eyes, 'cause the day is the day the provies are having a hose down.
Loyalist prisoners too complained of brutality.
The hate that I had for the screws in those blocks was something that just wasn't normal. It just wasn't normal.
You say it was hate for the prison officers more than the IRA?
Oh yes, no problem.
I wouldn't dream of doing to a dog what some of the stories I've heard of what they done the guys scalding them.
No. I've heard this over the years about us going in and beating them, and it never happened. It glamorises their position, very much so. It's sort of the maze, Long Kesh, look, that's part and parcel. But no. Mostly it was all in defence, self-defence, or if we've been ordered in to remove them. And they're resisted, obviously force would have to be used.
Have you hit prisoners?
No, but if a prisoner hits me, I'll not walk away. And I've told them that years ago.
Have you seen other officers hit prisoners?
Yes, I've seen prisoners hit officers. I've seen prisoners hit officers, and I've seen officers retaliating.
Prisoners we've talked to have talked about systematic beatings.
I've heard all this crap before, and I'll tell you now, it's crap.
Officers faced more and more intimidation from Republicans and Loyalists.
If they found out your name and address, maybe your wife's name, Christian name, kids' names, they'd write on a bit of paper and leave it on the landing. And you'd have been patrolling up and down the landing and seen a bit of paper lying. Lift it. You can imagine opening that bit of paper amongst 50, 60 prisoners in an H block. And there's your wife's name, kid's name, your address, maybe your car number. No matter how tough you are, like we get tell you.
You could be walking down the wing and the next thing there's your car registration wrote on the wall. What can you do about it? Change your car. 6 months later there's your new car registration up on the wall.
And these weren't just idle threats. In all, 29 prison officers were killed, 8 from the maze. Prison officers paid a very heavy price for working in the maze.
Well,
A lot of them were murdered.
it's hard. It's hard. I mean, I would never celebrate or rejoice at anybody's death, but there's one particular screw who, throughout his time that I was on the blanket, he never eased up for 1 minute.
What happened to that man?
That man was executed by the IRA after some years.
Murdered.
Executed by the IRA. This man was a war criminal, to all intents and
He
purposes.
was a prison officer.
This man was a war criminal.
We were cannon fodder. I mean, when it appeared to us as prison officers that we were expendable.
We buried our dead but went to work the next morning and carried on as normal. And that's the way it worked. And all we asked for, and sometimes with trouble getting it, when we were burying one of our dead, that the prisoners remained locked that day. We went back into duty the next morning and carried on as normal.
That deadly animosity intensified when the hunger strikes began. Lawrence McEwen went 70 days without food.
It was as if I was getting into as if I was going to sleep and struggling to stay awake. It's just if you're very tired and trying to stay awake, and yet I was actually already in some sort of level of unconsciousness at that time.
As he reached his 70th day on hunger strike, his mother intervened to save him. In all, 10 men died before the strike was called off, after concessions were made to the prisoners.
I don't see why Maggie Thatcher went ahead and let them do that and then give in to all their demands. It doesn't make any sense.
To let them all die and then give them.
But it also cost the lives of prison officers as well. It also cost the lives of staff too and people outside.
The balance of power had shifted, as became dramatically apparent in 1983.
It was a lovely summer's day, and I saw a helicopter circling overhead, and I turned to my wife and said, I bet that's trouble. We walked indoors, the telephone went, and it was my private secretary saying there'd been an outbreak from the maze.
38 members of the IRA had escaped in the most serious episode in British penal history. Roadblocks were set up around the prison and 19 were recaptured soon afterwards. But over the years, the regime in the maze grew more relaxed.
Towards the end there, we used to make the home brew and that. And we might have made a hot disco going. We had the boys in, we had the disco lights going, and we had the boy up doing scratching the decks and all this, you know, and a few drinks going around and one thing and another.
By 1997, the prison was seriously out of control, culminating in the death of the LVF prisoner, Billy Wright. Following the public outrage which followed Wright's death, prison authorities allowed cameras into the maze.
Who controls these wings?
Well, in what sense do you mean?
Well, I mean, who runs the show?
Well, I control the wing. First of all, I control the block. Now, within their wings themselves, they manage their own lives.
Control their own lives or manage their own lives?
Well, manage their own lives.
So why had the prisoners been granted those concessions? It was an understandable process over time, according to the current boss.
One of the reasons that prison staff have been murdered and intimidated is an attempt to get the regime changed, and management has been very conscious that by sticking to certain positions it was actually putting prison staff at more risk. It's to the credit of staff that they're prepared to take those risks, but management also has a responsibility to reduce those risks to a minimum.
So they had to give way to those threats?
People have taken, I believe, the decisions that seemed to them to be right at the time.
Today's prisoner releases will leave the maze practically empty. So what should happen to these notorious blocks?
I've heard people saying that it should be left and it should be a museum and things like that. I don't agree with that myself. I think the quicker we can get away from that, the last 25 years, the better.
Personally, I would like to see it flattened, because the hunger strikers is our own personal memory of Long Case. To me, anyway, it is. That's what I look at it as. And I wouldn't like to see any of them in cages or anybody going up to visit me.